Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Roberts. I'm the resident dramaturg at the Indiana Repertory Theater. Welcome to this backstage chat with Laura Gordon, who is the director of Steel Magnolias. Hi, Laura. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here with us. What
Thanks.
made you want to direct Steel Magnolias? What about this play appeals to you?
Well, I first became acquainted with this play right when it was written. I mean, it was written in 1987, so it's like 35 years old. And I became acquainted with it by actually being in it. I played
Oh,
Ruby in the 80s when it wasn't a period piece, when the clothes were not retro. That's just what we wore. And that was just my big hair, at the time. And so I've known about it since it first came out, and I knew about it and worked on it before the film was even made. So it has a really sweet place in my heart. And coming back and revisiting it now has been so much fun.
that's great. So you've done it as an actor and as a director. How is that? How do those things compare?
Oh gosh. And the thing that I've found, I mean, I started my career as an actor and came to directing about 10, 12 years ago, I guess. And what I keep discovering and rediscovering is that each feeds each other. Every time I act, I remember something or learn something about directing and vice versa. And so it's just such a pleasure to direct an amazing group of women. I can't say enough about these six actresses. They are dreamy. So it's been very rewarding.
That's lovely to hear. You mentioned the movie a moment ago. It is a very well known movie.
Yes, it is.
As you approach the play as a director, how do you deal with that or how do you ignore that?
Yeah, I am a fan of the movie like everybody else, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time revisiting the film in preparation for directing the play. And I think because, as a film, what it did is that it made this story, known to huge numbers of people around the world. It still remains a very favorite movie for a lot of people. But it also is a film, and the story gets kind of blown out. That was a hair joke. It goes We go from the play all takes place inside of Truvy's beauty shop, and the film does what a film does, and it expands it. We meet the men in their lives, we see the town, and that's all great for a movie. But I love the fact that the play is just these six women, and it's just inside this one environment. So I have a fondness for the film. And the thing that's really fun with audiences is that you can tell the people that know this movie really well. They kind of it's like Rocky Horror Picture Show or something. Like they chime in with certain lines, and they, mothers and daughters and sisters and groups of female men too. But I've just been really taken by the mothers and daughters who come to see this play.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Passing it on from one generation to the next.
Mhm.
This play was written for an all white cast, and our production, that is not the case. As a director, how did you think about that as you were thinking about casting? And then how did that process happen while you were casting?
Yeah, I mean, the play was written. It's a semi-autobiographical play that based on the playwright's family and where he grew up, which was very white in the 80s. But we're living in a different time, and as theater artists, we're trying to be much more inclusive in on stage and off. And so it was an important conversation to have with both Blake Robinson from Cincinnati Playhouse and also with Janet Allen from IRT, that how do we go about creating a world that makes sense? And so in the casting process, we decided that we were just going to be open-minded and not take anything off the table and have everybody audition and try to cast it with the best people for the roles. And there's it's these little catchphrases these days, color blind casting, color conscious casting. And I think what we tried to do was consciously cast a group of women who could be friends and colleagues. And our consciousness, with the great help of one of our actresses, Gina Daniels, who plays Miss Clary and who is African American, to have represented in that salon products and styling methods that would work for her hair, so that we weren't being colorblind, just, you know, like ignoring the fact that she's Black, but, you know, getting the right hot oil treatments and the hot combs and the things that ground us in a reality for her. And we ended up with a lovely mix of women. And it just never even crosses my mind. They just all make sense. I don't think anything calls attention to itself. It's just a group of incredible women and family and friendship.
That's what you want it to be.
Yeah.
If it sticks out, then you've not done something right.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, the only caveat I think that we had going into the casting process was that it didn't feel to me like Trudy, who is the owner of the salon, it didn't feel to me like she could realistically be African American, because African American hair and hair salons are so very different from what the rest white people, what we have done. It didn't mean that she couldn't be a woman of color. It's just that very specific casting for her, I didn't think would make sense unless you did a whole, you know, like there was a film version that was like a completely Black salon, which was fantastic, but that's not what we were doing either.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You mentioned Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. For those of our audience who don't know, this is a co-production. This is something that theaters around the country do frequently. We love to do co-productions because two theaters produce a play together and then it saves each theater money. So this particular production of Steel Magnolias began rehearsals in Cincinnati in February and has finished its run now. And now the cast is going to come to Indianapolis, and the set and the costumes and everything else is going to come to Indianapolis, and they're going to do a run here at the IRT. So what are the particular challenges as a director when you're dealing with a co-production? The different spaces, the different cities, how does that enter into your process as director?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the spaces, the performance spaces between the two theaters are quite different. There are some very odd sightline things that happen on that stage in Cincinnati. And so the staging that takes place for that space is going to be quite different than what we're going to need to do at IRT, which is more of a traditional kind of proscenium. And
for those who haven't been to Cincinnati Playhouse, it's a similar fan-shaped auditorium like the IRT, but a much deeper fan and a much deeper thrust. It's really almost more like the IRT upper stage, but in a fan shape. Whereas our main stage is a slight thrust, but it's not as extreme.
Yeah. And so all of that has to go into consideration with the scenic design. And the way that we ended up solving it is that Regina Garcia, who is our scenic designer, who's fabulous, what we're going to do at IRT is that we're taking the set and we're turning it like 5 degrees counterclockwise to kind of change some of the angles. And then there's like a little bit of extra flooring that goes in Indiana. And I'm going to need to do some restaging, because there's certain things that I needed to do in Cincinnati because of the uniqueness of that space, that if we tried to repeat it, it would look silly, you know. So we need to play around with it a little bit.
That's interesting. So there'll be a little more of a rehearsal process than there often is with
Yeah, I'm hoping that, I mean, I feel confident that these ladies, you know, they've done the play for a long time, so I don't think any of that's going to throw them, you know. But I said to Gina, like, you know, you little travel, all the little places that you go and perch in that first scene, that's probably going to be different. So stay tuned.
Well, you mentioned the women in the cast. I know from talking to them last week, they were all so excited that although the run was ending in Cincinnati, the the run of the show was not ending, that they were going to continue to do the show for another month. And so I know they're happy about that, and I'm sure they'll be happy to make adjustments to
Oh
make it
yeah.
possible.
Yeah, you know, often as a director, I open a play in a city and then I leave the next day and I never get a chance to come back and see it again. And, you know, at this point, they have all done they've done 30 performances of this play. They arguably know this play a whole lot better than I do. So I'm actually really interested to see what they can teach me about the play and what they've learned by being in front of an audience so many times, and whatever I can do to, you know, help guide them through this next portion. But I'm so excited, and you know, on stage and off, I love these women, and the chance to spend any downtime with them is just it's a bonus for sure.
That's great. That's great. What are the particular for this play? What are the particular logistical challenges? Like, there's all that hair that has to
Oh
be
yeah.
done on stage. You mentioned how it was written in the '80s when it was contemporary, and now it's a period piece. Talk
Mhm.
about why it has to be a period piece. Why you can't update it, as well as
Yeah. I mean, I was really struck by, I mean, a couple of things. I think the play holds up beautifully. I think it's a perfect play for this moment that we're in right now, especially coming out of COVID. And I don't know, I mean, to see a story where women are holding each other up and holding each other accountable and teaching them and just being friends and to champion each other is just something that I want to see through laughter and tears, you know. So it seems like a perfect story for me. And I don't know, I can't put a cell phone into that play and have it make sense, right? There's just certain things, and the sort of the medical history of the time that, you know, there are some medical issues that are dealt with, and just where we are in the world is different. And I
the
think it
pop culture references in the play.
totally, totally. So, I mean, all of that would need to be changed, and that just doesn't seem, it seems a lot sweeter to me and warmer to me and nostalgic to me to have a reference to Princess Diana, you know, or Lady Diana, or, you know, all of those cultural things are super fun. But logistically, obviously one of the big things was hair, and we were so fortunate to have in Cincinnati the wig and hair person there, Amy Whitaker, who worked. You know, so we ended up having, you know, like normally you schedule costume fittings and you schedule wig fittings. Well, we were scheduling like hair washing fittings, you know, like giving our actors a chance to figure out how to wash someone's hair, figure out how to set someone's hair. So there were all those lessons. And then there was trying to incorporate it into the action of a play. And, you know, I gotta give a shout out to Susan Linsky and Brittany Liu, who play Anal and Truby, for doing everything they do while acting, you know, while saying lines, while keeping the ball, you know, up in the air. So it took a lot. It took a lot of repetition, but we had great support. We knew from the get-go that we needed to tackle that early. It's not something that you want to wait on. But, you know, we had the wig for Shelby in the first scene. She comes in for a wedding hairstyle, and she comes in with her hair all set in rollers. And they were able to prepare that wig for us in rehearsal every day, which was amazing.
Wow. Wow. Because yeah, that's a big transformation that happens right there on stage.
Yeah.
I don't. Do we see? We don't see any actual hair cutting in the play, do we?
Well, it's like the end of a haircut.
Little snip.
It's the little end of a haircut. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's,
Yeah. I know there's a scene that happens right at the end of a haircut. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you if there was a particular character you identify with. Obviously, you identify with Truby to a certain extent because you played her.
Yeah. It's such an interesting question because you know, I was thinking it over, and in a way I can relate to all of them, which I think is a sign of a good play, right? It's like these characters were based on real people. So the investment in them is honest. And and it's fun to come back and revisit a play at an older age, where Truvy certainly spoke to me. I was a little young to play Truvy at the time, but Truvy spoke to me as the younger characters did, and now I, have the perspective of I gotta love that Miss Clary and Weezer situation, because if I were acting in this play, I would be playing one of them, I think. So, but I do think that there's a way in for almost anybody in watching this play and who you can relate to.
One of the stories that Robert Harling, the playwright, tells is how the play is based on real people, but he would never say who the character of Weezer was based on, because he didn't want that person to be mad about how she's portrayed on stage. And then when all his friends from Louisiana came to see the play originally, they all thought that Weezer was based on them.
I know.
And we're proud of it.
They were like, I'm Weezer. No, I'm Weezer. Yeah. It's awesome.
I love that. I love that. This is a play that could very easily drift into exaggeration and caricature. How do you as a director keep that from happening and keep the play feeling real? Because while it is a comedy, it has some incredibly serious stuff in it as well.
Yeah, it does. One of the things that I think was a good lesson to me was, and again, it came from, I think, the same article that you were just quoting about that Weezer story. But in that original production in New York in the 80s, those ladies went into the first preview with an audience. They didn't know that it was a funny play, so they weren't playing it for laughs, right? It's a very funny play, but the jokes of the play are to amuse each other. It's not to amuse the audience. So it's not like a setup and punchline. It emerges out of circumstances and character. So trying to stay really true to that. And then, design-wise, we worked really hard. Holly Payne, who's our costume designer, who's from the South. She's from Arkansas. So she had a great eye and appreciation of who these ladies are. And to try to, even though we're going back and doing these styles from the 80s, to try to make them look and feel like clothes and look and feel like hairstyles that are real,
And the 80s, while I am a child of the 80s and I loved the 80s, it is an era that is very easily to make look ridiculous nowadays.
Yeah. We also, I think we were just all really shooting for every bit of truth. We were all just always really trying to stay honest. Little things like, there's a radio station in town. It's like, what kind of music is on that radio station? And it felt like the more specific we could get, the better off we would be. And so we just landed. It's not like it's a revolutionary idea, but we sort of landed in a country western world of the 80s, which really, I think, grounds and locates us in a way that's much more specific than if it were just basic 80s music.
Mm. It's a cast of all women. Have you ever directed a cast of an ensemble like this of all women before?
Yeah, this is the biggest one. I've done a couple of, like 2-person plays that were both women. And then I've also done Lauren Gunderson's The Revolutionists, which is 4 women. But this is the biggest one. And also we have a completely female design team as well. So that was new and pretty great, actually.
And what do you think that contributed to the process?
I just think, I just think it lended to a specificity of, there's something, there's another story from Robert Harling talking about the incident that sparked this play, and talking about being at a little reception after a funeral, and where all the women were in the kitchen and the men were in the living room not saying anything and not knowing how to deal with this tragedy. And that he walked into the kitchen and the women were telling stories and laughing and crying and holding each other up. And when he walked in, they all stopped. And so there was something that was very, very specific about that female experience. Not that men aren't empathetic and couldn't contribute to this play as well, as they certainly could. But this was unique and it felt right.
One last question. What has surprised you most about this experience?
Uh, I think, okay, two things. The first one is that I'm surprised that nothing surprised me a lot. You know, I kind of had a trust in this play. I trusted that if we got the right people in the room together, we'd be able to figure it out. And like all of that happened. So that's a wonderful surprise that there wasn't a big thing that surprised me. But the other one is that I had no idea how much I would enjoy female country artists and music from the 80s. It was like a genre that was not my thing, and I love it. Like, you can't do this play without having a Dolly Parton song, I don't think. So that's been really fun.
I look forward to hearing it. I look forward to
It's
that.
a good playlist. It's a really good playlist.
Yeah, that's what I've been told. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today,
Of
Laura.
course.
For IRT audiences, Laura directed our production of Boeing Boeing several years ago, which was such a delight. So if you saw that, you know she knows how to handle comic material with finesse. And I've heard great things about the Cincinnati production. I'm really looking forward to seeing it in Indianapolis. Thank you very much, Laura Gordon, director of Steel Magnolias at the Indiana Repertory Theater. Bye bye, everyone.